Rahim, and let's see, it's going live right now. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inshallah, today we're going to be covering Surah Al-Araf, ayat 47. Let's look into those ayat. 56. Let's see, 56, 57, and 58. This is what we're hoping to cover today. So let us start, inshallah. And before that, I think it would be fair to kind of summarize what we were working on last time, just to make sure that we remember everything. We were talking about ولا تفسدوا في الأرض بعد إصلاحها وادعوه خوفا وطمعا إن رحمة الله قريب من المحسنين. So we said that this actually, let's actually get our marker right there. This actually continues with the different definitions of Tawheed, whether it's in faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or number two, Tawheed in ritual / worship, or number two actually. And number three, Tawheed in legislation and certainly in action. And that's when we went in certain details in the lecture before that about the definition of ethics, morality, and justice and all of that in legislation. So we went in details with that one, and we basically summarized it. And we said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِن يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ وَمَا تَهْوَى الْأَنفُسُ وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَّبِّهِمُ الْهُدَى, that they would follow speculation and what basically their desires would motivate them to do. وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَّبِّهِمُ الْهُدَى, and certainly the Lord Almighty had sent guidance upon them, or sent guidance to them, and therefore we would see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us that certainly there are different speculations, there are different theories in understanding ethics and trying to understand how we can legislate in a certain way. But even that legislation would actually be narrow in bringing about solutions, or probably even stability within the society. If we're talking about perhaps social, we're talking about economical, political, military, we're talking or natural and ecological and all of that, all these different areas actually require legislation and actually require organizing from the Lord Almighty Himself, because أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ الْخَبِيرُ. Because certainly the one that created everything is the one that basically has the information and certainly has the ability, the power to legislate in how everything must be organized and how everything will fit a certain interest, and certainly without contradiction. So ألا يعلم من خلق وهو اللطيف الخبير. We're talking about al-Latif, we're talking about al-Latif to basically say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is most subtle. So when we talk about subtle, we're talking about the one that is basically the one with the deep knowledge to basically rule things even in ways that you may not recognize. And certainly when we look at al-Islah, we went in details with al-Islah, and we said وَادْعُوهُ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا, and worship Him or invoke Him with khawf and with tama'. We talked about al-khawf, we talked about fear, we talked about al-tama', and we also talked about husn al-dhann billah, having the good thoughts in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we said it falls within two main categories. Husn al-dhann billah, that you would think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in ways such as mercy, in ways such as different provisions that He will give you, or different ways that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you would hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless you with, embrace you with, etc. But we said in the second category, it would not be husn al-dhann billah if this does not match perhaps the circumstance that you probably put yourself in. So for a person that is committing, let's say, haram, at that moment to say, hey, I want to do husn husn al-dhan billah and actually believe that even though I'm committing this haram thing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will still forgive me, we'll say, wait a minute, that's not husn al-dhan billah, that's su' al-dhan billah. Because in that circumstance, you're supposed to be thinking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His magnificence and how transgressing the limit is actually not going to be something that will not get where you're not going to be getting accountable for, and that you basically have to take in consideration the position and the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and therefore not transgress the limit. Okay. Yet we continued with khawfa wa tama'a. We said we would worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in fear. We would fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to transgress His limits, and perhaps maybe He will not be content of us, because we at the end of the day would recognize إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would accept only from al-muttaqin. And Ali ibn Abi Talib used to say, despite all the work that he was doing, he would always say this ayah, إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would only accept from al-muttaqin, is what would basically get him scared, because he doesn't know whether he is from the category of al-muttaqin. So when that ayah says, verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will only accept from al-muttaqin, he thought, I don't know if I could make it. Even if I were to guarantee one rak'ah that it was accepted, I'll be content, because I would know that I qualified for the position of being a muttaqi, and I would then consider that I am safe for the other actions, because then if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would accept one rak'ah from me, then I would know that I fall within the category of al-muttaqin. At the same time, we talked about something that Ibn al-Qayyim would use, and certainly many other scholars, which is making it like a janah of khawf and a janah of tama' or raja. So whether we're speaking about khawf, or speaking about rahab, or we're speaking about tama' to mean raghab, or to mean raja. So all of those are within the same category. So whether you're talking about raghaban wa rahaba, so the word, where was it? Let me see right there, so you can see it right there to make sure that we're on the same page. Where was it? Hold on, let me see it. Okay, here we go. So we talked about whether you're using the word rahab to actually mean fear, or raghaban to actually mean tama'. Both would actually mean pretty much the same thing, that you are hopeful that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be the one to reward you for the good that you had basically done, and hold you accountable for the things that you probably had committed. So in that situation, the Muslim basically embraces too. نَبِّئْ عِبَادِي أَنِّي أَنَا الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. Inform my servants that I am the most forgiving, the most merciful, and at the same time, let them know that verily my torments are the most painful punishments, basically. So we're living between these two wings in order to make us stable. We cannot just think of al-maghfirah and without thinking of al-adhab. So we have to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold us accountable, and that we have to be fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then at the same time, we have to be basically wishful and hopeful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He will forgive us, depending on the circumstance that we're in. Now, that's the same thing we talked about chaplaincy work, or what we would say al-maw'idha and al-wa'adh. What is al-wa'adh and al-maw'idha? Al-wa'adh basically means to soften the heart, okay? And it basically means to reach out to the heart. That's al-wa'adh. So if you were to talk about reaching out to the heart, you're speaking about ways to, one, you're probably directing the person to do what is right. And or two, you're probably helping the person find answers to the misconceptions that they might have. So it depends on the person on how you will do wa'adh, and certainly probably Sufi sheikhs are probably the best experts on this, by the way. And certainly you would have different groups. Specifically, I would say in Syria, you have a lot of groups in Syria that are doing outstanding job in practicing while for women specifically. And you have in other areas, but I don't think, to be honest, I don't think that we can necessarily say one method of WAV works for everybody because you have different keys for different hearts. You just have to remember that. Let me give you an example. A woman comes over to Umar ibn al-Khattab and she says, "My husband fasts all day and stays awake praying all night." So Umar ibn Khattab said, "What a great man your husband is." She said it again and again and again. Who was overhearing all of this? It was Ubay ibn Ka'b. Ubay ibn Ka'b, he said she wasn't endorsing her husband. She was actually complaining about her husband. Umar al-Khattab was, I guess, shocked at the time. How did you understand that? And she said she was telling you that her husband is throughout the day, he's basically he cannot approach her intimately because he would be fasting throughout the day. And that's the same thing throughout the night. So Umar ibn al-Khattab tells Ubay, well, if you figured out the inference of what she meant by her words, then you take the case and go solve it. What does Ubayd then decide to do? He basically brings over her husband and he says, "Yes, this is what I do because I want to be committed to taqwa, etc." All of that. Well, that's great, but your wife has the right. We're going to assume that you're married to four women. 3 days you can practice your ritual in this manner, and then one day would be considered her day. We're going to solve it this way. And that's one thing. When you look at this is Umar ibn Khattab right there, but then he needed Ubay ibn Ka'b. There's no question. There's no way that anybody can say that Umar ibn al-Khattab is less of alim or less of taqwa than Ubay ibn Ka'b. There's no question that Umar ibn Khattab is way better in his deen, in his ilm than Ubay ibn Ka'b, period. There's no question. Umar ibn Khattab was actually min al-ashram basharin bil Jannah. There's no question. But just because he had the ilm, and just because he was a khalifa, and just because he was from al-ashram basharin bil Jannah, doesn't necessarily mean he has all the keys to solving all the problems, or same thing if we're talking about wa'adh. Different hearts may require different methods. And it's not about the education. Just like we were talking about yesterday, and we said, you can be a teacher, but your students may actually excel in probably delivering the message. They may excel in having a certain skill in reaching out to people because that's a different skill. We support one another. We learn from one another. In certain skills, they're basically a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just like in hadith al-Munzir ibn al-Ashaj ibn Qais, when the Prophet ﷺ tells him that you have a character that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger love, and he asked what they were, and he said, al-hilm wal-ana. It's basically forbearance and it's basically gentleness. And he asked him a question. He said, are they things that I basically had trained, or that I disciplined myself into, or are they things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in me? And he said, they're things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in you. And that's to let us know that you have different gifts. Ilwal is also a gift. Not everybody is capable of doing that. And people, subhanAllah, it's like a lock, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will unlock that ability to reach out to hearts, to touch hearts. But the most important thing about reaching out to hearts is what comes out of your heart will get to other people's hearts. Number two, al-ikhlas. People are not stupid. People recognize when something is behind your intention, when you are trying to somehow probably get some favor or probably get some endorsement or probably get something that is personal, again, some personal favor. People are not stupid. They will see it from your eyes. They will see it and hear it from your words. Your voice changes. They can see it. The most important thing that you want to always remember, don't whatsoever do any action but for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-ikhlas, al-ikhlas, al-ikhlas is key. One, for your akhirah and even for your dunya. For your akhirah and for your dunya. So when you look at that, يَدْعُونَنَا رَغَبًا وَرَهَبًا, that's another definition for al-ikhlas. That you're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where you're fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not fearing people, and that you're seeking the praise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the endorsement from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the gift, the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a tama'. What am I having the tama' for? What am I interested in? What am I looking for? What is the motive behind every single action that I'm doing, or you're doing, or we're doing? It's basically a question that we all ask ourselves. It's not a personal favor, not a favor or a gain in this dunya, but it's a gain in the akhirah. It's a gain in the akhirah. And the more ikhlas this person is living in, wallahi ma kharaja min al-qalbi la yasilu illa ila al-qalb. Wallahi, anything that comes out of your heart, it will reach the hearts. It will reach the hearts, and it will also reach where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will look into it. It will. Look at this ayah. When you look at يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي. What is النفس المطمئنة? When the malaika will call out, يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة. Oh, it's speaking to the heart. Speaking to what? Speaking to the nafs that already reached a level where it is living in that tama'nina, living in that tranquility, living in that peace, internal peace. What is it saying? What are they telling it? It's basically يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية. Certainly the context of this ayah, ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية, meaning to go back to its Lord, meaning to go back to its Lord in death, basically. That's it. You're going to be with the Salihin. Your soul is going to be with the Salihin, preparing it to a next transition, basically to move to Jannah. فَادْخُلِي فِي عِبَادِي وَادْخُلِي جَنَّتِي. At the same time, you can read this ayah differently. In order to attain a level of tama'nina, a level of tranquility, a level of connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you would have to irji'i ila rabbika radiyatan mardiyah. You would have to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You would have to basically connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala radiyah. You're content with the rulings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, content with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically sent, content with embracing everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted of you. And in that situation, ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي, and embrace الصالحين. Be along with the صالحين. فادخلي في عبادي. Enter with my servants. Be a part of the servants, whether watching Gems of Light, or whether at the masjid, or whether in Hajj, or whether in a class and that you're probably conducting. فادخلي في عبادي. It didn't say فادخلي مع عبادي. في عبادي. You need to be a part of them. You need to be a part of them. وَدُخُلِي جَنَّتِي. And now you get to enter Jannah, but not until you become a part of al-mu'mineen, until you become part of those servants, until you surround yourself with these salihin. That's when you're going to see the difference in its effect on your heart. So when you look at خوف وطمع, it's another word for ikhlas. At the same time, we would like to use one definition that the Salihin used to use for the definition of al-ikhlas. They used to say al-ikhlas استواء المدح والذم. استواء المدح والذم. What does that mean? Istiwa means that everything to you is equal. What is equal? Whether people are praising you or whether people are putting you down, you're never going to stop doing what is right. Why? To you, whether people mock your hijab or whether people call you perhaps maybe looking so weird or looking like you're coming from some ancient civilization, or whether people praise you, you're looking great, that makes you look so young, etc. All of that to you does not matter and will not change the steps that you are taking, because what you are doing it for is nothing but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's istiwa'ul madh with them. So you do it طبعا في الله. You're doing it because you want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be content over you and not the society. In bil khawf, you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and even if they would الذين قال لهم الناس إن الناس قد جمعوا لكم فاخشوهم. What did they say? What did they say? They said فزادهم إيمانا وقالوا حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل. And that's what happens. They will tell them, hey, you're going to lose your job. If you basically hold on to your hijab that way, you will probably not get the credit at school. You're probably not going to get hired, or who knows what. They're trying to basically tell you and convince you that by giving up on some of your Islam, that you're going to get a better opportunity and probably getting it out there. But then, قالوا حسبنا الله. To us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Razzaq. To us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that gives the ilm, is the one that gives the rizq, is the one that gives the position, is the one that gives the ranks, is the one. Therefore, وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ. We'll depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't get the privileges from people, we get it from Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open the doors. You put in the effort. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. You put in the effort. Have that ikhlas. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inshallah will bring the rizq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inshallah will bring the opening. Inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make the change in everything. Okay, let's see. إِنَّ رَحْمَةَ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ مِّنَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Verily, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qareeb. Whether qareeb in place or whether qareeb in His mercy near the believers, or whether qaribun min al-muhsinin, in place and in position and in its essence. Meaning the essence of what? The essence of mercy of the Lord Almighty is near. Who? It would be near al-muhsinin. What is al-muhsin? Al-muhsin is basically the person that is so committed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they're at a higher level than doing, let's consider it as the minimum level. Yeah, I got to do 5 daily prayers. Okay, I'll do 5 daily prayers. No, this one goes and says, no, I want to do qiyam al-layl as well. Here's a muhsin. And this sister, yeah, well, I just have to do this much. My husband or my in-laws, I'll just be very minimum. No, she says, you know what? I'm gonna actually be there and actually help my mother-in-law, whatever she needs. At the end of the day, she's in a position of my own mother. I'm going to give the support in whatever level I can do. I'll be there to bring about that support. And at the same time, that for a mu'min, it's different than a muhsin. Al-muhsin is even a higher level. Why? Because if you were to look at al-muhsin, you have to go to the ayah, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ. You got to look at this one. And the second reference, you got to look into the hadith when the Prophet ﷺ said, قَالَ أَخْبِرْنِي عَنِ الْإِحْسَانِ قَالَ أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ. You have to look at these two references in order to understand the level of ihsan. The first one, al-ayah, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders for the level of justice. That is the limit. The limit is justice. But al-ihsan is even better than justice because it's a higher level. What's the difference? Justice is when, yes, this is my responsibility, these are your rights, and this is where our border begins and ends. That's the level of justice. Al-ihsan, that no, despite the fact that you're probably harming me, I'm going to contribute, not because you deserve it, but because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves my commitment. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves that I would compromise, not because you deserve it. Wallahi al-azim, you don't deserve it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves that we compromise for His sake. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves that we would live up to a certain principle of a salihin. You don't deserve it, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves my compromise, my commitment, my submission. And I'm doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's al-muhsin. Al-muhsin is embracing that level of commitment fi sabilillah. Fi sabilillah. Even when they know that they're not going to be getting anything in return, at least in this dunya. They know they're not going to get anything in return, but they're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's go for the other hadith. That when the Prophet ﷺ defined it, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه. It's to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you could see Allah Almighty. How's it as if you could see Allah Almighty? Well, this person had surpassed the level of iman, that level of commitment that made iman. Oh, that's talking about iman, just talking about that commitment and position in Jannah. Talk to them and you would feel, well, let's continue right there. I think I still didn't skip it. Is it nushra? Is it nashra? And certainly, ta'ala is us a comparison. So recognize, that's why you would see, recognize with your visual blow, and it would be surrounded that sense of one, you're able, you're sensing happiness coming in to basically be filling you internally, and that carries the water and creating all the dead earth. And revelation would talking about two things, aren't we? No, we're the rahmah in revelation itself carries is basically going to be very similar to the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wind basically carries that cloud in order to bring pouring rain, the dead earth, and then the greenery and bring it back. That's the same way. Itself coming from basic, the ayat would always say that Allah down in the same way that we're talking about it. Yes, water basically brings in that mercy from the Lord Almighty and bringing in life to the dead. Allah would send in this revelation, send down the revelation, and from Him direct hearts of raving these hearts. If a person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are lifeless, connected with Allah, are full of life. You will not bring life and understand oxygen in order for you to, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us that example. If you don't have it surrounding you, change of temperature, you're not going to be comfortable internally, because when that means ruh, there are two sides to interpreting the disseminates, spreads about, and particles, science, and all that simile that the أخرجنا به من كل الثمرات. You said what's when it says كذلك نخرج, basically right here, basically starts making us know that there's a parallel. I can see that you have.
Vicky, this is back again.
Yes, this is the same.
من أعمال
And then it becomes, no, the word nafs itself, just like in nafs al-lawama, the single nafs basically different. In your nafs, in the beginning, it held a cow. It's nafs al-ammara bis-su'. The other stages, ruh, to mean what brings. So when a person, the departure of their soul, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala,
the meaning of الروح about the nafs is her for
the same word, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi, when it is after death.
For this person.
I want to look at the word كذلك, that there is a pattern, there's some similarity, that there's actions that are similar. So when this is how the dead are resurrected, way just be sent the way that it reacts. When I then certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will then, just like in the hadith we talked about before, just like in the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ basically says in the hadith, and it's in Sahih Muslim. Did I actually mention it here? I remember mentioning it yesterday. It was in Sahih Muslim to let us know. Here we go. This is the hadith right there. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet ﷺ said, Yursilullahu aw qala yunzilullahu mataran ka'annahu tal. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically send a rain, and this hadith is authentic, as it's like a pouring rain, and then فَتَنْبُتُ مِنْهُ أَجْسَادُ النَّاسِ, and then people's bodies will basically plant. The bodies will plant, like the bodies will grow like a plant. Yes, that means the bodies will grow like a plant, and then it would be said, Ya ayyuhan nasu halummu. So then, of course, there's that order. That order, just like the order of blowing wind, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will order that all the souls would basically get into the bodies again, and that's when they come back to life. And then they're told, وَقِفُوهُمْ إِنَّهُمْ مَسْئُولُونَ. Let them line up. قِفُوهُم doesn't mean just stand up. It just means line up. It can mean stand up. It can mean that to basically put them in a certain row. All right, that's قِفُوهُمْ إِنَّهُمْ مَسْئُولُونَ. What is إِنَّهُمْ مَسْئُولُونَ? Now they're going to be held accountable. In other words, now that they're going to be standing in this position for another station of their own life. In other words, our life does not end with just rest in peace and just die. That's not the ending. That's the beginning of a new start, basically, of Yawm al-Qiyamah. So if a person dies, their Qiyamah just started. Their Qiyamah just started, not meaning the general Qiyamah, but their own personal Qiyamah just started, at least with that in that grave right there. Now I want you to look at this one, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. And you know what? Let me look at this hadith right there. And he said that how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will resurrect the dead. And then he mentioned عن أبي رزين. Wonder why he didn't say Ruzain. Okay. I have no idea why he didn't say, is that really his name? رزين العقيلي قال قلت يا رسول الله كيف يعيد الله الخلق وما آية ذلك في خلقه قال أما مررت بوادي قومك جدبا ثم مررت به يهتز خضرا قال نعم قال فتلك آية الله في خلقه. Okay, so what does it say? That this Abi Razin al-Uqayli, he came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, O Prophet of Allah, how does God or how does Allah create or resurrect the creation? And how does it happen? When he says, وَمَا آيَةُ ذَلِكَ فِي خَلْقِهِ, like what is there something that is similar to it that I could see to visualize what this looks like? So what did he want? Remember, ayah can actually mean three different things. Number one, an ayah can mean a revelation. An ayah can mean an example that you could actually see in the open book, meaning the world, meaning the nature, etc. And number three is basically a similar pattern that you can study by looking at nature, and then you can see it basically reflected in what was written already in the text. Okay. So what he wanted was, he said, you know, I want to see something that I can understand in the creation, in nature. And the Prophet ﷺ said, did you not come across a valley that was infertile and what looked like it's dead? It's like it's empty, it's lifeless, there's no greenery, nothing. And then you came back to it and it was basically moving with all greenery. Moving with greenery, it's We're talking about plants moving, the wind is blowing, and certainly it's so beautiful with all the greenery. You can see birds basically roaming, became like an oasis right there. And he said, yes. He said, well, that's the example of the Lord Almighty basically giving you something that is similar, visual, something that you can actually see in nature for you to see as an example. And let's see right there. He basically said, well, this is narrated in al-Bayhaqi, fil Asma' wa Sifat, etc. But that's not actually enough to go and depend on that, whether it's actually an authentic hadith or not. So therefore, we need to actually see further resources to make sure that this hadith is authentic. Let's see right there. And these guys did an outstanding job for us. And they said, guess what? They said, well, there's this debate whether this hadith is authentic or not. Well, some scholars actually considered it as a level of Hasan. Okay, what does that mean? There are three different levels for a hadith and its level of authenticity. The hadith can be Sahih, meaning we're talking about ما اتصل إسناده بنقل العدل الضابط عن العدل الضابط إلى منتهى من غير شذوذ ولا علة. What does this Chinese statement mean? Okay, meaning that I would have a chain of narration. Basically, they're all committed in their deen, they're all committed in transmitting the hadith, they're all basically meeting one another. They're at least, one part of chain of narration met the other one, and they're not contradicting each other in the statement that basically was narrated. So we're looking at certain conditions. Of course, this is just really fast. And then, but we're also talking about something that is very critical within the wording itself. We got to make sure that it's not enough that they're pious, but we got to make sure that they're mentally competent to memorize the quotation and actually transmit it. In other words, to basically tell us what the quotation looked like. So we're talking about somebody that is not only good and competent in their mannerisms and in their religious integrity, but we're talking about mental capacity as well. We need to make sure that these people are capable of passing on this ilm. So therefore, if this person lacked certain level of competence in their ability to bring about the exact quotation, then in that situation, that would be Hasan. Now, yet you could see that there are differences of opinions, but regardless, just keep that one in mind, that just like there are differences of opinions on an Islamic ruling, sometimes there can also be a difference in the classification of a hadith, whether it is authentic or whether it is not fully authentic, because certainly sometimes we're looking at profiles that may sometimes be an area of controversy. Just keep that one in mind because it helps us understand a lot of where the scholars might actually have